for joining me today, Chad.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here.
Tell us about what you're up to these days.
Yeah, I'm focusing on the intersection of artificial intelligence, philosophy, and consciousness. And so I'm talking about that on my podcast. I'm talking about that on my YouTube channel, and I'm writing a book about what it means to be human in the age of AI. I also work part-time as a AI lawyer and policy person. So yeah, I'm kind of doing a bunch of different things.
And you've been working with different Silicon Valley companies, and right now, and on the side, you also have an interest in yoga and meditation and spirituality and that sort of stuff. Something that I'm interested in, and I think many people are also opening their eyes to this kind of dimension of life, you might say. How do
Yeah.
you combine a life as a corporate lawyer with a more kind of spiritual way of life, as you do with yoga and so forth?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's such an important thing to think about and talk about because I think a lot of people find it hard to live in both worlds, or I've tried to live in both worlds myself, and I think I found a pretty good balance. And actually, I think yeah, I've been working in Silicon Valley for over 20 years, and yeah, that experience of working in tech and working as a lawyer, especially, it really motivated me to try to find a way to manage my stress, and that's how I got into all these practices. And so I can talk about that more if you want, but yeah, the way I find the balance between them is that I actually think they go hand in hand. Like the externally focused, materialistic kind of work, and the internal practices and mindfulness, they kind of weave together in my life. And it reminds me of this, like in the yoga tradition, there's this thing called the householder path, which is this idea that you are a yogi or a practitioner who has a job and a family and lives in the world, and you use your experiences as an employee or a business owner or a consultant or whatever, or a family, a father or a mother, a family member. You use those experiences to as a sort of practice, as a sort of spiritual practice. And so it's in a way, it's like you could say it's a more advanced practice in the sense that it's forcing you to kind of confront the conflicts that arise in life. Whereas living in a cave and being like an ascetic, that's in a way easier because you're not really dealing with people and conflict and friction and all that. So, anyways, I think this householder path is kind of how I see my approach. And I think it's the most relevant for people today, this way of kind of um, weaving mindfulness into your daily life and your daily tasks. And with that, I think there can be a little bit of a trap there though, where you might tell yourself, oh, my work or my whatever, my life is my meditation. But I still think you do have to set aside some time to actually practice meditation or yoga or whatever it is.
There's kind of two ways you could do it, I imagine. Like
Yeah.
one way is that you take one mask on when you're at work, and then when you go home, you kind of take that mask off. But I
Yeah.
suppose that's a difficult lifestyle to sustain. Sooner or
Yeah.
later, it would be better to integrate, your different your work personality with your the person you are behind closed doors with your friends and family. It can
Yeah.
be a challenging balance to find, I believe.
Well, I mean, absolutely. And Tobias, I hope we all get to the point where we don't have to wear a mask in any way. I mean, maybe this sounds idealistic or something, but I think that it's important in this age for all of us to find a way to like combine these worlds in a way that's authentic and honest, so you're not leaving you're not keeping your spirituality or whatever necessarily private as you're in the workforce. I think that the corporate world and the technology world desperately needs more people who are spiritual and mindful coming in and transforming, I think, those worlds. I think in the corporate world, in my experience, it's far too purely rational and left-brained, and it neglects entire parts of the human, like emotional intelligence and embodied intelligence and all these things. So I think, you know, the way to kind of change the world, I mean, maybe this sounds a little bit ambitious or crazy or whatever, but to change the world, I think everyone just needs to start being themselves, being authentic, and doing what they really want to do, and not sort of living inside these preconditioned boxes, if that makes sense.
It totally does.
Yeah.
The issue, as I see it, is, let's say you work for a private company. The whole foundation of that company is to make money now and make
Yeah.
money in the future.
Right.
And that just puts a lot of stress on people. And it's the same thing
True.
for people working in, a public institution or whatever. This kind of stress is really hard to get around. There are all these expectations, and also socially.
Yeah.
And that's from my own experience. When I do best at work, it can actually be an advantage if I'm a bit more distanced,
Yeah.
emotionally speaking, because especially as a lawyer, sometimes you really need to have that kind of, it's not a facade, it's more kind of, um, what's the right word for it? Kind of laid backness, where you can
Hmm.
see the bigger perspective and not get too caught up in emotions, essentially. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah. So what you mean, it's better to be sort of impassioned and not overly emotional as a lawyer. That's a healthy approach. Is that what you're saying?
In some ways, I can hear it sounds a bit like cynical.
Yeah. No, I know what you're saying. Yeah. I think you have to really navigate each situation on its own. So I think there are situations that require, obviously, the practice of law, especially as you and I both know, is a very analytical, rational endeavor, and so that does require you to be in that mode of, yeah, kind of dispassionate, objective view of a situation, whether it's a contract negotiation or a trial or whatever it is. You do want to have that approach, absolutely. But then when you're interacting with your colleagues or your clients, I think there can be an opportunity to bring more of your full self to that interaction. You can, yeah, you can be more sort of like, not to sound too hippie, but like, more heart opening, more kind of like connecting on a human level. But it is tricky because I think a lot of clients, as a lawyer, a lot of clients expect you to be this kind of like almost, I don't want to say robotic, but yeah, this kind of highly rational, kind of dispassionate, like warrior for their cause or something, right? I don't know.
Makes me wonder, how have you found your role in a corporate environment? As you say, it can be a bit left-brained, and
Yeah,
it can be, people are caught up in everyday things. From my own
yeah,
experience, when I do my writing on Futuristic Lawyer, there's a lot of philosophy involved. So I tend to
sure.
think big thoughts, and
Yeah,
sometimes my mind is kind of up in the clouds. And then when
yeah,
you meet your colleagues, they're in a very different mind space. They need to do this, they need to do that.
yeah,
Sometimes it can be hard to get on the same wavelength
yeah.
with people in an average office when you do work that is so intense emotionally and even spiritually sometimes.
True. That's true. Yeah, and by the way, I love your content. So yeah, keep doing that. But
Thanks.
yeah, but yeah, I mean, it reminds me of experiences I've had over the past 4 or 5 years working in different corporate roles where because I've been doing yoga and teaching yoga for 20 years, and because I've kind of gone to India and done all this work on myself, I've cultivated what I call an industrial strength nervous system, in the sense that um, I'm always calm, and I hardly ever get rattled by some interaction at work or some client issue or whatever. And I've been in these roles where my colleagues will comment on that or notice that, and they'll point it out. Like, how are you staying so calm all the time? Like, what are you doing? Because everyone's so stressed. I'm sure you've experienced this. Everyone in the corporate world is usually stressed out. Um, and I feel grateful because I've been able to do this, and I think it's so important for your own sanity, but it does take a lot of investment in these practices to get to that point. But I think there's this misconception that you have to like the corporate culture these days, especially in America. I don't know how it is in Europe, but the corporate culture is like the more stressed out you are, the more sort of yeah, the more seriously you're taken because people think, oh, this person's important, this person's busy. And so exhibiting stress can be a almost like a badge of honor or like yeah, like a prerequisite for being taken seriously in the corporate world. And I think it's important for us to try to shift that because there's a way that you end up being like habitually anxious, and the anxiety becomes this non-specified thing where you're not actually anxious about any particular thing. Your default mode is anxious, and then you just kind of find excuses to be anxious, but you don't actually need to be anxious at all. Does that make sense?
It does. It does.
Mhm.
And it's typical with drinking a lot of coffee and
Right.
especially if you're an attorney that litigates and goes to court, then
Yeah.
there's like a very competitive culture, like who can stay in the office for the longest. And
Yeah.
you don't need lunch, you have to work. And there's, even though the working conditions might legally be fair, there's a lot of pressure and social competition, which just means you have to work a lot and be very stressed out at times. It's part of
Yeah.
the work description for some lawyers.
Yeah.
Is
Yeah. I
is
mean, yeah. Go ahead.
is that what inspired you to go into like the yoga and meditation path? Because
Yeah.
you were
Yeah. Kind
experiencing
of.
this kind of stress. Yeah.
Yeah, well, first, you're reminding me of this time. So I worked at a Silicon Valley like law firm for 4 years in my early career, and I remember to speak to what you're saying. I was doing a lot of these all-nighters. Like we were doing M&A, mergers and acquisition support, and sometimes that required these late night meetings. I think actually this one time I'm thinking of was a negotiation with somebody in in the Netherlands, actually. Yeah. And so we were up all night, and I hadn't slept in like 2 days, and I was like at my desk eating lunch on the next day, and I fell asleep on my desk, and all the partners noticed this as they walked by my office, and I got a lot of kudos. Like I got a lot of credibility for falling asleep at my desk because they knew that was because I had been up for like 2 nights or whatever, right? So there is that culture of like it's encouraged, it's rewarded, it's yeah, it's appreciated that you're like overworked and stressed and all that stuff. Yeah. So yeah, to answer your question, I yeah, I started going to yoga because it was making me feel so much better. Like I remember, I'll never forget the first time I went to a class. This is like 18 years ago, where I was in Shavasana and I experienced total peace, maybe for the first time in my life. I don't know. Like in Shavasana, the corpse pose at the end of class when you're laying down on the floor. I just had absolute peace there, and that really motivated me to want to get more of that, and I quickly went from drinking alcohol as a way of managing stress, which is not a healthy way of managing stress, to using yoga to do that. And it's funny because we can talk about this if you want, but uh, the initial hook of yoga was the stress management, but then of course quickly it becomes like a way of life. But yeah, that was the big attraction.
I see what you mean. I have, experimented with yoga and meditation as well, but I feel it can quickly become just another duty that I have to do.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
for instance, let's say I have to show up at 8 o'clock for work. Then I
Yeah.
wake up at 7 and I do some meditation at 7:30, and then I have 10
Yeah.
minutes, and then I have to, rush out the door. So
Yeah.
if you get my gist, it can quickly become just another habit during the day, which might even stress you out a bit because you have
Totally.
to be somewhere else and in a couple of
Totally.
minutes.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a real challenge for people too. I'm trying to think of this famous there's a famous kind of Zen saying that you should meditate for half an hour a day unless you don't have time, and then you should meditate for an hour a day, which is kind of a funny way of saying like you got to get over this idea that you don't have time. But yeah, I think it's so important to approach it simply and in small chunks and to be gentle with yourself, but the first thing I'll say is like kind of what I was saying a minute ago about my experience in Shavasana. You want to find a way through your meditation practice or whatever practice you're doing of having that experience of peace or unity consciousness, we would say in yoga, or even just like for me, my meditation practice, on almost every day after I meditate, I feel an enormous rush of bliss that just comes from the meditation practice. And so I think, it's the sooner you can have that positive reinforcement, it becomes more of an incentive, and then it doesn't feel like work. It feels like, oh, I'm doing this thing that's going to give me a positive experience. So I would hope that people would find a way to have that experience in their meditation practice, whatever that is. So, but you start simply 10 minutes, even 5 minutes, whatever it is. You don't want to like be too ambitious, and it's so important to not have this attitude of I'm not doing it right or I'm not good at it, because there's no like being good at meditation, right? There's just sitting for 10 minutes. Like it doesn't matter what you do or if you did it right or whatever, like you just as long as you're doing it, that's meditation. And the way I approach it, and I've taught meditation for many years, is you approach it like it's just you sitting there in a state of self-love. Like you're just there in a total state of acceptance of yourself. And so there's no rigid like I've got to be like good meditator. I've got to do this right. It's just this kind of soft, kind of gentle approach. So yeah. And the last thing I'll say is the style that I practice and teach is mantra based. And what's nice about mantra meditation is that it gives your mind something to do, because your mind, as I'm sure we've all experienced, is designed to like to go, like to think. Like thoughts always come, right? So if you can give your mind something to do, almost like giving a dog a bone, then it's so much easier to meditate. So you start doing this mantra, it could be even just one syllable or whatever it is, and that gives your mind a little like distraction, and then you can kind of be more in the space of silence. But I just want to clarify, like with meditation, you're not supposed to be in a total state of like no thought. That eventually can happen. It's wonderful when it does, but most of the time you are thinking. So that's fine.
Practically speaking, for how many times a week would you recommend that a beginner meditate?
Um, again, it's starting small, starting simple. So, if you work a full-time job and you're busy, maybe try it on the weekends first as a starting point. Like so two times a week. But then yeah, I mean the important thing is the daily practice eventually. And so you would want to do like even 10 minutes a day. You can do it in the morning or the evening. Evening is great because then it puts you in a more of a restful state for going into sleep, so you can do it right before bed. But yeah, 10 minutes a day, every day. And if you can just give yourself like a 30-day goal, because the studies have shown that habits form after 30 days, right? So if you could just do like 10 minutes a day for 30 days, then it'll probably become a habit, hopefully. Yeah.
And if you have one day where you really don't want to do it, should you skip it or should you do it like no matter what? What do you think is the best way to approach
Yeah.
that?
That's a good question. One little hack that I know for this is if you feel resistance to doing it or doing anything really, it could be writing or anything, you just tell yourself, I'm going to sit down, I'm just going to do it for a minute or like 2 minutes, like very small. But then once you actually start, sometimes you're like, okay, maybe I'll just keep going a little bit longer. Sometimes it actually does just take you starting. But but yeah, there's days where you might be going through like a challenging experience and you feel so distracted or really triggered or something. And those days, it's important to like honor that. And maybe it's okay not to meditate. You never want to make it like an obligation. But
Mm.
there is this perspective, there's a perspective in yoga and Eastern mysticism in yoga it's called, or in Sanskrit it's called tapaha, which is like a a thing, a kind of discipline that helps you to grow as a person or helps you to grow spiritually. And so you could treat this thing like a tapaha, like a an opportunity to like to grow as a person, you know. So that could be one way of convincing yourself to do it, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, amazing.
Yeah.
To talk about something else, we could keep
Yeah.
on talking about this for a long time, but
Sure.
I also want to get into AI.
Yeah.
What sparked your interest in AI?
Yeah, actually I it's funny, I started my career in AI. So I went to school, I went to well, I went to college for computer engineering, and then I went to grad school, got a master's in artificial intelligence, because I was like a kid who like started coding when I was 11, and I just love technology. Um, so yeah, I went to grad school for AI, and this was like 30 years ago now. And so it was just a long, long time ago. But yeah, I was doing like research into neural networks and all the stuff that's popular now, but it was at the time it was the AI winter. So not much was happening technologically, and it seemed like it was going to be a long road to ever get to anything resembling intelligence. But yeah, it was how I started. And so then I went and took this whole detour through uh, law and policy and all this stuff. But what's fun now is that with the AI explosion and my recent like I got a master's in philosophy, cosmology, and consciousness recently. So with all of that happening, it's a nice opportunity for me and everyone else to kind of talk about AI, its implications, and it's kind of broader implications for society as well.
And what's your underlying sentiment about AI? Are you positive or are you skeptic about AI as it looks today?
Yeah. Yeah, if you watch my YouTube videos and listen to my podcast and everything, you'll find that I'm probably more skeptical than I am. Well, I think I'm kind of neutral, but it sounds like I'm pretty skeptical because there's so much hype right now about what AI can be and what's possible and artificial general intelligence, super intelligence, all these things. And I think there's a lot of hype that I'm trying to dispel with my content. On one hand, I'm skeptical of the grandiose claims that are being made by tech companies and tech leaders. But on the other hand, I am excited about it. I think it's really cool and fun, and it's opening up all these possibilities, and it's an amazing tool, and I use it all the time. I use it on a daily basis. I use Gemini and these chatbots for different purposes. I use the image generators for different things, video generators. I mean, all that stuff is so fun and interesting. It's complicated too because of, copyright issues and rights holder issues and yeah, possibilities of deepfakes. And we can talk about all the dangers of AI, but I think it's really interesting as a technology. And I think what's interesting about it too for me is that it's forcing us to have certain conversations that we need to have that we weren't having. For example, um, talking about our economic model, our political system. Those are in a way sort of threatened by AI or destabilized by AI. Talking about our philosophical worldview as a society, I think, is also necessary because these claims that these technologists are making are essentially metaphysical or philosophical. So we can talk about that too. But yeah, there's so much going on that I just love it. And I think it's an exciting, chaotic, destabilizing, wild, psychedelic time. I don't know. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, it's all of those things.
Yeah.
And it's funny because AI, it's not doesn't really mean anything concrete.
Right.
It can mean so many different things.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like it can be whatever people want it to be.
Yeah. Exactly.
That's also like a part of why I am, attracted to working and writing about AI.
Hmm.
Is that it can be a gateway to discuss so many other issues.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
can be like a starting point to open up a wide range of discussions.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. It's funny. There's this thing called the paradox of the receding. It's like something like the receding definition of AI in the sense that AI is whatever we haven't gotten to yet, or it's like the definition is always sort of receding on the horizon as we create new technologies. So that's interesting. But yeah, I think I like thinking about these questions like is AI going to be sentient? What is consciousness? What is the mind? How does the mind work? What is intelligence? All these things are interesting to me. Yeah.
And what is your intuition? Do you think the AI we are building now can become conscious in the future? Maybe long term, like 50 years, 100 years?
Yeah, that's such a good question. And it's relevant for lawyers like us too, because as soon as we deem AI systems or robots or whatever to be sentient or conscious, then all of a sudden we have to talk about, do they have rights?
Hmm.
Because then consciousness implies that they can then experience suffering and pain, and then yeah, you want to give them legal protections and rights and all that. But I think this is a big topic. This is a big conversation. It gets into philosophy. But my personal view is that AI and robots, using the current approaches, anyways, can never be sentient or conscious because I want to try to explain this in the simplest accessible way I can, but um, the current approach to AI is based on the idea or the assumption that the mind arises as an epiphenomenon of chemical firings in the brain, right? And consciousness is part of that. So this is the kind of materialist theory. So uh, we live, as I'm sure some of your listeners know, we live in the age of scientific materialism, which means that the prevailing kind of worldview that we all share is that science explains the cosmos or nature or reality, right? And so the current scientific explanation of things is that everything is matter slash energy, and um, for that reason, like the only way we can really explain consciousness is as arising from the matter in your brain, right? And this is known in AI, cognitive science. It's known in philosophy of mind circles as the hard problem of consciousness. Like nobody, so far, no scientist or anybody has explained how phenomenological consciousness, or like, our experience of the world, can arise from matter. Like nobody knows how that could possibly work, scientifically or metaphysically or anything. And so this is a long-winded way of explaining that I personally subscribe to more of a Vedic or Eastern view of reality, which is that it's all fundamentally consciousness in the first place. And so if that's the case, then we don't need to create consciousness out of a combination of like silicon or whatever in a computer, because it's already part of this larger consciousness. But within this view that I'm talking about, which is called in Western philosophy idealism or monistic idealism, within this view, only life or only biological life can have consciousness. And so I guess the answer to your question is that, in my view, only life can truly be conscious. But there's interesting conversations we could have about quantum computing and whether that might be possible in terms of AI and consciousness, that kind of thing. But yeah, I'll stop
Hmm.
talking there.
It's fair. It's a really good point.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, I want to formulate something, but I'm also a bit afraid that I'm going to sound like a completely crazy person. So
Well,
I'll try to
yeah.
find the right words.
Yeah, give it. Yeah, and then we could always edit it out if you don't like it, right?
Yeah, right, right, right. I think, sometimes in the Western world, we feel like we have everything figured out. Like
Right.
our whole business, our whole world is, managed by governments, of course, but also by, big technology companies. And
Sure.
everything is kind of streamlined and, we have everything figured out. Sometimes I wonder if there's, so much more to life that
Mm.
we're not aware of. And that
Yeah.
is one of the things I think about, when people say that AI will be sentient or super intelligent in a couple of
Right.
years.
Right.
What is life even? What is conscious even? We don't know very much when it comes down
Yeah.
to it. We think we have, figured everything out, but maybe we really don't. And
Totally. Yeah.
that's like a, could be a fascinating starting point for, like a public discussion in society about what the hell we're even doing.
Yeah, yeah, totally, totally. I mean, it's funny because I feel like there's a cycle that goes through every 100 years or so. Civilization likes to claim that it's solved everything. Like if you look at what scientists were saying in the late 19th century, they were basically saying like we figured out all the theories, we basically understand the world. It's just a matter of fine tuning. This is before quantum mechanics and all that, you know. So it's like every 100 years or so humans like to say that we figured it all out, and that's why I think this AI thing has a lot of hubris. You know, there's a lot of like overconfidence that they're bringing to the table, and I think we need to be, like you're saying, a little bit more humble about it. Because there's so many philosophers over the history of philosophy who point this out. Like I think Schopenhauer said something about how it's not possible for us to understand the world because we're sort of like inside of it. You know, the only way to understand the world is
Mm.
to be outside of it, and that'll never be possible. Um, yeah, like you could look at like a philosopher like Gilles Deleuze. You know, there's a lot of people along the way who say that it's not possible for us to fully understand anything. You know, and I think the advance of technology, like the techno scientific endeavor that's been going on for the past 100 or 200 years, it gives us the illusion of mastery and control of nature because we have all these scientific wonders, you know, like we have smartphones and I don't know, I'm talking to you over over many thousands of miles, and that can make it seem like we've basically figured everything out, but I think we're so far from really understanding what's going on with life and consciousness and all that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's it's wild. Sometimes when I'm bored, I watch like videos about near-death experiences, for
Oh
instance,
yeah.
and
Yeah.
like psychedelics, like ayahuasca trips and all that. And I think it's so fascinating, these stories that people tell about what's out there and how they find out that they don't really understand anything.
Yeah.
That thought is really interesting to me.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, speaking of psychedelics, one I did a video on my channel a little while ago about like the implications of these sort of holotropic states of consciousness, which is a fancy word for psychedelic states, and what that means for AI. Because if people have shown that so many amazing scientific and creative discoveries have happened in these altered states of consciousness, and it's like we don't really know what's going on there, sort of like in terms of neuroscience and all that. And so if there's all these mysteries of consciousness, like psychedelic states and inspiration, these like aha moments that come to inventors and detectives and all these things. Like it doesn't seem like that's a sort of linear kind of mathematical computation that's happening, right? There's something else more deep and profound going on with these other states of consciousness, whether it's from taking psychedelic drugs or just from, too much coffee or, meditation or whatever it is, like that all points, I think, to something profound that isn't captured by like Chat GPT, right?
Exactly. It can't really be quantified. It can't
Right.
really, data cannot really show many of these mind states and feelings. It's just really
Totally.
hard to like represent in a matrix.
Yeah.
And that's also kind of what worries me about ChatGPT. We're in
Hmm.
a weird world situation right now where, for instance, many people distrust science. They don't
Right.
really believe many of the things that humanity have built our societies on. People have stopped believing some of the most basic things that
Hmm.
everyone thought were true like 50 years ago.
Right.
And in some weird way, I can also understand why people are tired of being treated like they can't think critically about stuff.
Mm.
Sometimes like big governments and big companies, they tend to treat people like consumers, and of course they
Yeah.
have to manage like a huge system or a huge user base, so they have to think into boxes and treat people certain ways. That's just how it is. But
Right.
people kind of mistake that for who they are, and the companies maybe mistake people for just being blind consumers, and that's
Yeah,
problematic.
it
And
is problematic. Yeah, yeah.
and now AI comes into the picture too, and
Yeah.
one could worry if it dehumanizes us even further. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's such a great question and such a deep topic. Uh, yeah, I think because we live in an age, kind of what you're getting at is that we live in an age of misinformation and everyone lives in their own bubble or their own reality where we all have different facts and different understandings of what's going on. And I think AI can only exacerbate that because there's different chatbots that have been trained on different things. And, there's like people like Elon Musk who fear that a lot of these AI systems are like quote unquote woke, and so he's making his Grok AI to be anti woke or whatever. So it's like, yeah, AI is only going to necessarily like feed that kind of confusion and disinformation and everything. So um, I think and to speak to your point about the role of science, like it's true. There's a lot of ways where science has kind of lost its way, I think, to some extent. And this is tricky to talk about because I don't want to sound anti-science because there's this whole anti-science movement. I think science is crucial and it's very important, and it plays a really important role in our lives. But there's this sort of attitude. There's an attitude of scientists these days, I feel, that's very kind of arrogant and sort of like elitist. And there's a whole movement that's been going on for the past 30 years in the philosophy of science where they're trying to hold scientists accountable to actually explain to us like what it means for us, like the work they're doing, like what does that mean for humanity? Like so many scientists now are off doing these highly specialized things that aren't connected to anything else anybody else is doing in science, and like it's all becoming fractured, and it doesn't really advance like the state of humanity in a way. There's a sort of scientific industrial complex happening, and so there's just so much going on with science that there's these people out there like Bjorn Ekberg who are wanting scientists to like to be more grounded and sort of like think more about the importance of what they're doing in terms of advancing humanity and not just getting grants and funding and that kind of thing. So, I'm kind of talking. I'm going a little bit far afield from the question, maybe, but yeah, I think the thing I think about that I think a lot about is AI and truth, right? Like, how do you ground AI in facts or in truth? It's a really challenging problem, and I'm not sure there's an easy answer to that. Like, Google, for example, with their AI products, they're trying to ground it in their, in their search and everything. Other people are doing similar things. Perplexity is trying to ground their answers in facts. But yeah, it's a real challenge, and I don't know the answer to it. Yeah.
Mm. That would also require that we kind of knew what the truth was.
Right.
As as I see it, I think that it's a mistake to view AI systems as more than they are. As you
Hmm.
say, I think there are many of these tech leaders who are very ambitious and very enthusiastic about what they're doing. That's
Hmm.
all great, but it also kind of creates this hype bubble and a lot of
Yeah.
marketing. So people kind of misunderstand what these tools are supposed to do, and
Yeah.
they have too high expectations. One
Yeah.
approach, as
Yeah.
I see it, could also be to maybe just use these amazing AI systems as like as tools, and
Yeah.
and that's it, as like features more than life-changing things. Right
Totally.
now, it could change in the future, of course.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, that's exactly what you're saying. I think the danger of all this hype and mythology around AI with these tech leaders is exactly what you're saying, which is like giving people the impression that it's more than it actually is. And so a lot of people, I know a lot of people who think that AI is basically already sentient or already super intelligent, and they trust it to give them guidance and advice and answers and facts and everything. And it's just not there yet, And that's why I think to bring it back to the conversation about spirituality and mindfulness and meditation and everything, I think the most important thing that people can be working on these days for themselves is cultivating discernment. Discernment it's such an important thing, like a faculty these days, because there is so much misinformation and so much like there's conspiracy theories, all these things, and nobody has the capacity to actually like discern like relative values of truth. And that's such a hard thing to teach people, but it's also so essential. And one benefit of meditation and mindfulness and yoga is that it does give you more discernment. You know, same thing with psychedelics. Like psychedelics are famous, like ayahuasca and other ones. They're famous for sort of like opening your eyes to the to reality, like to really to what's really going on. I'm not talking about like conspiracy theories. I'm talking about like um people who like there was a podcast last week, what's that called? Search Engine. There's this podcast called Search Engine where they had a story about this other podcaster who was like a anti-woke kind of cancel culture like podcaster who just loved talking about how terrible woke culture is and all this stuff. And then she did ayahuasca and she lost all interest in this like culture war thing. And I think that's an example of where yeah, like these tools, these like technologies of the sacred, as I like to call them, they can give you a deeper connection to reality that allows you to avoid being misinformed, I think.
Do you think they're for everyone? Do you think everyone should try it?
Try psychedelics or ayahuasca or whatever.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if it's for everyone. You know, it can. I mean, for some people who have like a risk of psychosis, it can trigger that. So that's one risk. But or like certain health risks or that kind of thing. But I think it can help a lot of people. Yeah, it's a good question. You know, part of the reason that I love this one style of yoga that I teach and that I learned in India, uh, I call it elemental yoga. The reason I love it is because it can give you sort of smaller versions of these psychedelic experiences, but through natural means, through breath work and pranayama, certain mantra practices. So I think, there's these healthier kind of alternatives you can do. I mean, just meditation alone can give you these similar experiences sometimes. So yeah, one of the two maybe. Yeah.
It's also kind of anti-capitalistic, this whole mindset with using psychedelics and spirituality and such. If everyone, did the ayahuasca or other psychedelic medicines and found peace, then it would be hard to sell products and get people to spend more time online. That's
This is
that's
true.
another. It's a paradox, right?
This is true. Yeah. Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think, that's what's interesting about AI too, is that if you believe the hype and I think there's certain aspects to it that are probably going to be true at some point. If we're going to enter this period where everyone's losing their job, for example, because of automation and AI, blue collar workers, white collar workers, everyone, knowledge workers, everyone's losing their job, right? Then what do we do about that economically and politically? I think that's an interesting place where AI is forcing us to reconsider our economic model. And yeah, maybe capitalism is out of date and we need to replace it with something else. I don't know what it would be, but um, there's this one author, this the Greek finance minister. I forget his name, but he has this book, Techno Capitalism, and he makes this point in the book that
Right,
we're
right.
po we're already post-capitalist. We're already because of the technology industry, we're already kind of beyond capitalism.
There's also another Greek author who's written a book called Techno Feudalism, I think it's
That's what it
called.
is. That's what it is. Yeah, yeah.
Right.
Techno-feudalism. Yeah,
He talks also about the US and China as two separate, superpowers as they are, but
yeah.
with cloud capital as the main currency.
Right. Cloud capital. Yep. Yeah. Giannis Varoufakis. Right.
Right, right. That's his
Yeah.
name. I read that one
Yeah.
actually. I can highly recommend it. It's
Yeah.
a great book.
Yeah. It's good. I've seen him talk, and I have the audio book, but I haven't gotten through the whole thing yet. Yeah.
So, what can people expect from you here in the next couple of months or in the next year in
Yeah.
terms of your content?
Yeah, so I'll be talking more about what it means to be human, basically, in this AI age or this intelligence age. And yeah, I'm in the middle of working on this book, and the book is really an examination of intelligence, like human intelligence and other forms of intelligence, but really the other faculties of what it is to be human, and that includes things that don't we don't talk about so much these days, right? So that includes intuition, emotional intelligence, embodied intelligence, wisdom, like how to cultivate wisdom and discernment, like we were talking about. Um, yeah, conscious intelligence, death, like our relationship to death. A lot of a lot of these sort of techno utopians in Silicon Valley, they also ascribe to this ideology of transhumanism and extropianism and rationalism and all this stuff. And they think that we can become immortal through technology, through mind uploading and replacing our organs with mechanical organs and all this stuff. And a big part of what I'm going to be talking about and what I am talking about is offering an alternative to that very kind of physicalist techno utopian vision, right? I want to offer more of a humane kind of vision where, humans have a lot of potential and we can become something greater through doing this inner work and through evolving consciousness, not just through outsourcing our evolution to technology, to machines and all that. So that's a lot of what I'm talking about. I'm examining our love affair with the machine metaphor because I think there's this idea that you see in technology circles and basically in all scientific endeavors these days, like biologists, geneticists, neuroscientists, they all believe that life and biology is essentially like mechanical or like a machine. And I think that metaphor comes from like the industrial and scientific revolution, but it doesn't mean that that's actually a well-fitting metaphor. I think we should come up with a more appropriate metaphor for nature, and then that might help us to reach a better understanding of ourselves and what it means to be human. So that's just some of what I'm going to be talking about.
Fantastic topics.
Yeah.
Do you know when you'll publish it? I look forward to reading it.
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm right now shopping it around with publishers. So hopefully next year, it's just a matter of finding a publisher, or if I can't find a publisher, then I'll self-publish. But I'd like to get a publisher because I want to have more of a to get it out there more and have more reach. So yeah, we'll see. Fingers crossed.
Cool. I think I will leave it at that. So
Okay.
thanks for this conversation. It was really nice.
Yeah, I really, really enjoyed it. I really appreciate you having me on the podcast and keep up doing what you're doing because I think the stuff you're talking about is really important too. So yeah, so thank you for that.
Thanks. Cheers.